Imagine turning 70 and being told there's no table for you at the restaurant where you wanted to celebrate. Every table full, every smile around you, and suddenly, your special day feels invisible. That's exactly what happened to me, until a stranger, a single father, stepped over and whispered words that changed everything. What he did next, I'll never forget. I had imagined my 70th birthday for months. I pictured the warmth of friends around me, laughter echoing across a room, clinking glasses, the glow of candlelight reflecting in soft smiles. But as I stepped up to the entrance of the restaurant, that image began to crumble in the harsh light of reality. I had reserved a table weeks ago, calling ahead multiple times to ensure that my small celebration, just me, perhaps a quiet drink, a slice of cake, maybe a gentle chat with someone familiar, would happen. But now, standing there, I was met with a flustered host who avoided my eyes, mumbling something about the restaurant being completely full. My heart sank, heavier than it had in years. All those months of anticipation, and it felt as if I were invisible. It wasn't just about the table. It was about recognition, about being seen on a day that should have mattered. Every reservation they had taken, every smiling couple I glimpsed through the glass, felt like a reminder that life had moved on, and I had somehow been left on the sidelines. I stepped back, my hands gripping my purse as though it were a lifeline, a small piece of security in a moment where the world suddenly felt distant. I watched families at tables laughing together, a young couple toasting with wine, children clinging to their parents' hands as they giggled at something only they seemed to understand. I could hear the soft hum of conversation, the gentle clink of silverware, the quiet jazz drifting through the restaurant, and it felt like I was standing outside a world I no longer belonged to. I told myself it was okay. I repeated it quietly, over and over, hoping to convince the small, anxious voice inside my chest. It's just one night, I told myself, and maybe it's not about what's missing. Maybe it's about what you still have. Yet, the disappointment dug its claws in, and it wasn't only about the table. It was about realizing that turning 70 didn't come with a celebration the way birthdays used to. My children were miles away, wrapped up in their own lives, careers, responsibilities, and distant cities that made it impossible for them to come. Friends had drifted away over the years, busy with their own families, their own commitments, and my social circle had quietly diminished. 70 years of life, 70 years of stories, challenges, joys, and heartaches. And it felt like the world had quietly decided this night wasn't meant for me. The weight of loneliness settled on my shoulders, a familiar yet unwelcome companion. I could feel it pressing in, a silent reminder that life isn't always fair, and celebrations are sometimes just illusions we create to comfort ourselves. I found a corner bench near the entrance, its cushions slightly worn, but offering a small sense of refuge. I sat down and tried to steady my hands, taking deep breaths as I watched the restaurant around me. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, their trays laden with dishes that looked more beautiful than anything I had prepared for myself in months. Candlelight flickered across the polished wood, highlighting the smiles of strangers and the quiet joy of togetherness. And there I was, an uninvited observer in someone else's happiness, a spectator to a world that felt just out of reach. My eyes fell on a framed photograph on the wall, a group of people raising glasses, mid-laughter, celebrating some unseen milestone, and I felt a pang of longing that I hadn't expected. I wanted that. I wanted someone to notice me, to acknowledge my day, to make me feel that 70 years of life deserved recognition, even if it was small. I muttered to myself, barely audible over the murmur of conversation. Maybe it's okay. Maybe I don't need this after all. But my voice felt hollow, empty, a whisper against the bustling reality surrounding me. I had convinced myself I could leave quietly, that I could slip out without anyone noticing, carrying the weight of disappointment alone. But even as I imagined stepping back into the night, my feet reluctant to move, My mind replayed decades of birthdays past, of friends and family gathered around tables, the warmth of connection and laughter that had once felt so effortless, memories of parties, of conversations lingering long after dessert, of eyes meeting mine with affection and recognition, came flooding back, and with them came the aching contrast of now, standing at the threshold of 70 years, alone, uncertain, feeling invisible in a room full of strangers. I tried to distract myself by observing the other patrons. A couple in the corner laughed over a shared joke, their hands brushing briefly, a moment of intimacy that seemed effortless. Across the room, a family celebrated a child's small triumph, clapping and cheering with such uninhibited joy that I felt a twinge of envy I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the absence of a table for me. It was the absence of connection, the reminder that life had become fragmented, that milestones could pass without anyone to witness them, without anyone to care. The quiet hum of the restaurant felt like a spotlight on my isolation, each laughter and clink of glasses a stark contrast to the silence I carried with me. I watched a waiter carefully set a table for two, the flickering candle casting soft shadows across polished cutlery. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine sitting there, the candlelight reflecting in my eyes, a simple plate in front of me, someone across the table willing to share this night with me. The thought was fleeting, fragile, like a bird hovering just beyond reach. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it, telling myself it was foolish to hope. 70 years had taught me many lessons, most of them about resilience, about managing expectations, about quietly accepting what life handed me. But the ache of loneliness was something that didn't fade so easily, something that clung to the edges of your heart, whispering that even on your milestone day, you might be forgotten. And yet, even in that moment of quiet despair, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, a subtle hope that perhaps the universe hadn't completely abandoned me. Maybe, just maybe, there was still room for a small miracle, for a gesture of kindness that could shift the entire course of my evening. As I sat there, gripping my purse and watching the world move around me, I realized that this was more than just a birthday disappointment. It was a moment that reflected something universal, the way life can quietly isolate us, even when we crave connection, and the way hope, however faint, can flicker in the darkest of times. Waiting for someone or something to fan it back into life, I had just settled into my corner, trying to make peace with the empty anticipation of my 70th birthday, when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A man was walking toward the host stand, a small child in his arms, and there was something different about the way he moved. Not hurried, not distracted, but calm, deliberate, and aware. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, and there was a softness in his eyes, a warmth that seemed to ripple outward even in the busy, crowded room. The child in his arms laughed, a high, pure sound that contrasted with the low hum of conversation around us, and I felt my chest tighten in a way I couldn't immediately explain. It wasn't pity or sympathy. It was curiosity, a fragile spark of hope that perhaps not all the world had forgotten how to notice the unnoticed. The man spoke to the host quietly, bending slightly so the child could stay close against him, his voice low but kind. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught the meaning, the gesture of a father trying to arrange a simple night for himself and his little one. I watched as the host hesitated, glancing at the restaurant floor, then nodded reluctantly, gesturing toward a small, empty table near my corner. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what was happening. I had expected disappointment, invisibility, the quiet acknowledgement that 70 years could pass without anyone caring, and yet here was a human being, unknowingly bridging the gap between despair and hope with a simple, quiet act. The man approached, holding the child slightly away from his body, so that they could both see me without intrusion. His eyes met mine for the briefest instant, and in that glance was recognition, not of me personally, but of the shared human experience of being overlooked, of feeling invisible when all you want is acknowledgement. Then, Leaning slightly closer, he whispered something that made my heart stumble in an unexpected rhythm. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentle, almost reverent. "Would you like to join us? My son and I, we have an extra seat." I blinked, unsure if I had heard correctly, if the exhaustion of anticipation and disappointment had played a trick on my mind. Slowly, I realized he was serious. A stranger, a man with his own life and worries, had noticed me sitting alone and had offered me inclusion, not out of obligation, not because he had to, but because he could. There was a grace in his action, a simplicity that carried a weight I had not anticipated. My eyes filled with tears before I even understood why. It wasn't just about having a seat at a table. It was about being seen, being considered, being treated as though my presence mattered in a world that had made me feel small. I hesitated, my hand instinctively gripping my purse as though I could anchor myself against this sudden wave of emotion. The child, sensing something in the moment, reached a small hand toward mine, his fingers warm and trusting. I looked at the father, his face calm but kind, and realized that all my years of life had led me to this moment, a moment of human connection that needed nothing more than an invitation, an acknowledgement of shared existence. You'd let me?" I asked softly, my voice trembling, fragile against the ambient noise of the restaurant. He nodded, a gentle smile forming on his lips, and motioned toward the chair beside them. "Of course," he said simply, as if the idea of denying someone kindness were inconceivable. I took a deep breath, letting the tension in my shoulders ease slightly, and slowly rose from my corner. Every step toward that table felt surreal, as if I were walking toward something I had almost forgotten existed. Inclusion, warmth, and the recognition that I, too, belonged somewhere, even if only for a few hours. Sitting down, I felt the child's small hand in mine and allowed myself to laugh softly, a sound I hadn't made for months. It was a tentative laugh at first, testing the waters of joy, but it grew as the father introduced us to one another more fully, sharing small stories of his day, of the child's antics, and of how they came to be at this restaurant on an ordinary evening that suddenly felt extraordinary. The simplicity of it amazed me. The fact that a shared meal, a single seat, and a little kindness could undo hours of loneliness, even if only temporarily. The waiter arrived shortly after, a candle delicately balanced on a small plate, signaling a birthday celebration of some sort. The father whispered to the waiter that it was my birthday, and the gesture, simple as it seemed, felt monumental. I felt my heart swell in a way I had not anticipated, realizing that this small act of acknowledgement, the recognition of my milestone, the thoughtfulness of a stranger, carried more weight than any elaborate celebration could have. The candle flickered, casting gentle shadows across the table, and I blew it out quietly, my eyes brimming with tears of gratitude and wonder. I glanced at the father, who smiled at me with a mixture of humility and warmth, and then at the child, who clapped his small hands in delight at the candle's extinguishing. I felt a connection so profound it nearly took my breath away. Here we were, three strangers, connected not by family, not by obligation, but by the simple, quiet act of one person noticing another's need. I had expected disappointment and invisibility, and instead, I received acknowledgement, warmth, and human connection. And in that moment, I realized how fragile yet powerful kindness could be. The father began sharing stories about his son, small anecdotes, the kind that make a room feel alive, that make you lean in and listen even if you didn't know the people before. He spoke of first steps, of little victories, of nights filled with quiet challenges and small triumphs, and I found myself laughing, crying, and nodding in recognition. Parenthood, responsibility, human life. These were the threads that connected us all, and yet it was the generosity of his heart that transformed my evening. I felt seen, acknowledged, and included in a way that I hadn't expected from anyone on my milestone birthday. It struck me then how rare such acts could feel, how often we miss opportunities to extend simple kindness, and how powerful they could be when we do. Here was a man with his own life, juggling responsibilities, challenges, and love, who chose to notice someone sitting alone and extend not just an invitation to a table, but an invitation to be seen, to belong, and to matter in that moment. I realized that for decades, I had underestimated the transformative power of these small, unplanned gestures. They didn't require grandeur, wealth, or planning. They required only awareness, empathy, and willingness to act. As the evening unfolded, we shared more stories, more laughter, more quiet moments that felt intensely private despite the busy room around us. I discovered details about the child's life, small quirks that made him adorable and endlessly entertaining, and I shared glimpses of my own past, memories of birthdays long ago, and reflections on life's unpredictability. I felt as if a weight had lifted from me, replaced not by something tangible, but by the invisible balm of inclusion and kindness. It was a gift more precious than any table reservation, any cake, any orchestrated celebration. I couldn't help but reflect on how many times in life we walk past moments like these, moments when we could extend a small gesture, offer a seat, a word, a smile, a hand, and instead we move on, distracted by our own concerns. That night, I learned that it doesn't take much to change someone's world, and that sometimes the world changes around us not because of planning, but because of the willingness of another to notice, to act, and to include. I realized that while we often seek happiness, recognition, or celebration in grand forms, the most profound impact comes from these quiet, unassuming moments of empathy and human connection. The evening had shifted in ways I could hardly have imagined. What began as a night of quiet disappointment had blossomed into something far richer, more profound, and utterly unexpected. Sitting at that small table with the single father and his child, I felt a warmth that went beyond the candlelight flickering between us. It was a feeling that had nothing to do with a reserved table or a birthday cake, and everything to do with connection, with being seen, with sharing a moment of humanity that transcended loneliness and circumstance. I realized then that true celebration isn't measured by the grandeur of the occasion, the size of the gathering, or the number of gifts. It is measured by the intimacy of shared experience, by the depth of understanding and kindness that can emerge in the simplest moments. As the father spoke to his son, encouraging him to try a new dessert, and laughing at the boy's hesitant first bite, I couldn't help but feel a wave of emotion sweep over me. It was a complex mixture of gratitude, relief, and awe. Here was someone who had the power to occupy this evening entirely with his own life and his own responsibilities, and yet he chose to include me. He chose to notice the person sitting quietly in the corner, the 70-year-old woman who had almost convinced herself that no one would care. And that choice, that simple, unassuming act of generosity, had completely altered the course of my night. I felt a surge of admiration for him, not because of what he had done for me alone, but because of what it represented, the power we each hold to make someone else's life a little brighter. The child, oblivious to the weight of the moment, reached across the table and took my hand. His small fingers were warm and insistent, and the gesture, innocent as it was, cut through the final remnants of my loneliness. I laughed, a sound that felt unfamiliar but utterly liberating, and he giggled in response, a small, joyous echo that bounced around the table and somehow softened the edges of the world outside. I found myself telling stories I hadn't shared in years, anecdotes from my past, childhood memories, celebrations that had faded into time, and even some regrets that I had carried quietly for decades. The father listened attentively, his eyes never leaving mine, nodding in understanding and occasionally sharing his own reflections. It was the kind of conversation that felt impossible to orchestrate, the kind that can only happen when people come together with openness and generosity of spirit. As dessert plates were cleared and the evening continued, I noticed something subtle but profound. The world outside the table, The busy waiters, the chattering diners, the music and candlelight seemed to fade away. It was as if our small circle of three had become a world unto itself, a place where loneliness had no meaning and where connection could flourish simply because someone had the courage to offer it. I realized then that for decades I had mistaken celebration for spectacle, for grandeur, for the outward signs of happiness, when in truth the most meaningful moments were often quiet, unassuming, and entirely unplanned. It wasn't the size of the party or the decor or even the cake that mattered. It was the intention, the recognition, and the willingness to be present with one another that created something unforgettable. I caught the father watching me for a brief moment, a look of gentle curiosity and quiet satisfaction in his eyes. There was no pride in what he had done, no expectation of gratitude or acknowledgement, and that made the act even more remarkable. I understood then that kindness, when offered without expectation, carries a unique power. It has the ability to heal, to uplift, and to transform moments of despair into memories that linger for a lifetime. The boy, sensing the depth of my emotion even in his limited understanding, climbed onto my lap for a moment, leaning against me, and I felt an intimacy that transcended age, circumstance, and experience. It was a pure, unfiltered reminder of what human connection could be and how profoundly simple gestures, sharing a seat, offering a smile, acknowledging someone's presence, could shift the course of an evening, a life, even a perspective. The waiter returned with a small flourish, bringing over a final course of dessert. I could see the father's subtle signal, the way he wanted to honor the day without making it overwhelming, and I felt a deep sense of appreciation for his thoughtfulness. The candlelight flickered again, casting gentle shadows across the table, and in that soft glow, I felt a quiet revelation settle within me. Life's celebrations are not defined by the external, but by the internal, the ways in which we recognize and honor each other, even in the smallest, most ordinary acts. I realized that my birthday, which I had feared would be lonely and forgotten, had become one of the most memorable days of my life, not because of what I had expected, but because of the generosity, awareness, and courage of a stranger who simply chose to care. As we continued to talk, laugh, and share the simple joy of being together, I felt a swelling sense of gratitude that I could not put into words. It was the kind of gratitude that fills you from the inside out, a recognition of the profound humanity that exists when people act from empathy rather than obligation. I realized that for years I had measured joy through conventional standards, parties, gifts, social recognition. But this experience had taught me that the most extraordinary moments are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice, to offer, to share. And in noticing, we create more than happiness. We create connection, meaning, and an enduring memory that remains long after the candles are extinguished. The child, sensing the emotional weight of the moment even in his playful innocence, offered a shy smile and whispered something that made both of us laugh, a sound that felt like sunshine breaking through a cloudy day. I looked at the father, my eyes glistening with unshed tears, and realized that this moment, this simple, unassuming act of inclusion, had taught me more about life, about human nature, and about the meaning of celebration than any party, any gift, or any planned event ever could. We lingered at the table, savoring the time together, not needing words to fill the spaces between us, content in the quiet understanding that what we were sharing was rare, precious, and entirely real. I thought about the hundreds of birthdays I had experienced, the people I had met, the celebrations both large and small, and I understood that the true essence of a birthday, or any milestone, is not in the attention we receive, but in the moments when we are seen, acknowledged, and embraced as part of the world around us. It isn't about the number of chairs at a table or the elegance of a setting. It is about inclusion, empathy, and the willingness to extend ourselves to others without expecting anything in return. That night, I realized that life had handed me a lesson I would carry forever. The most meaningful celebrations are those where kindness, connection, and humanity intersect, transforming ordinary circumstances into something extraordinary. As the evening drew to a close, and the father and his child prepared to leave, I felt a quiet sadness at the thought of parting, tempered by a deep sense of fulfillment. They had shown me, through one simple gesture, the immense power of noticing, of caring, of offering a seat to someone who thought the world had passed them by. I hugged the child, feeling the warmth and trust in his small frame, and turned to the father, my voice catching with emotion. "Thank you," I whispered, and in that single word was a lifetime of gratitude, recognition, and acknowledgement. He nodded, understanding that no further words were needed, and we parted with a sense of quiet completeness, a recognition that what had occurred between us was rare, beautiful, and utterly transformative. Walking out of the restaurant, the night air felt different, somehow lighter, more expansive. I realized that my 70th birthday, which I had feared would be filled with disappointment and loneliness, had become a testament to the extraordinary impact of human kindness. The lesson was clear. Life may not always provide the celebrations we expect, the recognition we desire, or the presence of those we love. But there is profound beauty in moments where strangers reach across the invisible divides and remind us of our shared humanity. Those acts, no matter how small, have the power to change everything, to turn isolation into connection, and to make a day we feared would be forgotten into a memory we will carry forever. Disclaimer: this story is based on a fictional scenario created for entertainment and inspiration. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. The moral is universal. Small acts of kindness can change lives, and human connection matters more than material celebration.